Alright guys, BLM here, we're back with a new video. In this video I'll be ranking every single main series game in the Assassin's Creed series up to this point, which includes 11 games ranging from Assassin's Creed 1 to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now most of these games I did replay very recently in preparation of this video, so I do feel like my takes on these are pretty solid at this point. Though there is one position where things could flip a little bit, but we'll talk about that a bit later. Now to give context here, I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan. I've played ever since AC1. Mind you, I didn't play it until a couple years after it came out, but ever since 2009, I've played all the games as they came out, and at this point, I've played every game at least 5 times, with my playthroughs of AC1 and 2 being closer to around 30 times at this point. Now, I will not be talking about any side games like Liberation or Bloodlines, or any DLCs like Tyranny of King Washington or Legacy of the First Blade. Those will be their own separate videos at some point in the future. So, also, there will be spoilers for every game in this series, so if you don't want to get spoiled, don't watch this video. This is going to be a very detailed video. This is going to be a video where I go through pretty much most of the things I even have to say about these games. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So we're starting off with number 11 here. The worst main series game in the Assassin's Creed series to me is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. In my opinion, this game has really soured over time. While playing through this game the first time, I was originally thinking this was going to be probably a game in the middle of the pack, probably like lower middle tier, but then I got to the endings, which I thought were really lackluster, and then through multiple playthroughs afterwards, I think I've just realized that, yeah, this is the worst game in the series. And a lot of that has to do with how boring it is, but I already talked about Odyssey in detail in another video, which will be linked in the description. But obviously, we'll talk a little bit about it here. Now, I really like the setting of Ancient Greece. I think Ancient Greece is a really cool setting. The problem I have with it here is that the open world itself is just a bit too big and doesn't really have anything too special within it. A lot of the areas feel very copy and pasted throughout, and I feel like the city of Athens itself is pretty boring. The combat is solid, and while I do think it's a watered-down version of Origins combat, it is still better than most other combat systems in Assassin's Creed. It also has one of the most boring mission structures in the entire series, with most of the sections in the game consisting of you talking to a person, that person gives you 3 tedious quests, usually they feel like side quests, and then once you complete them, you go back to this person, then they give you the quest to kill off the actual antagonist of that section. And this literally happens 9 times through this entire game. The side quests in this game are fine. There are some good ones like the Mykonos and Diona quest lines, but they're directly connected to the cultist storyline, so it makes me question whether I should really consider them side quests. Then the quests that have no connection to the other storylines are pretty forgettable, with probably only like 1 or 2 exceptions. Now, all of that is bad, but my biggest issue with the game is the fact that how much it messes up with the lore of Assassin's Creed and tries to distance itself from the franchise. Obviously, they added pointless dialogue options and the dumb demigod superpowers, which are far reach in my opinion from what Assassin's Creed used to be. Now, from a narrative perspective, I've always found the family storyline really boring, with very few memorable moments throughout, and most of the pacing being ruined by the aforementioned mission structure. The cultist storyline is not really a storyline, it's just you kill cultists and then you have the dumb cutscene of Aspasia at the end. And then we got the Atlantis storyline, which is the best of the bunch, but that's not saying much. I do think Pythagoras is one of the more interesting characters in the game, and while the modern day in this game is technically better than other recent games, it's still not good. I mean, Cassandra shows up in a suit. I mean, what do you think? Misios here is probably my least favorite protagonist in all of Assassin's Creed. They pretty much just feel like a shell of a character and have no real development throughout the entire story. And then also the voice acting is really bad. The side characters are fine, but they do get more screen time than many other games in the series. But most of them either come off as like cartoon characters, or they come off as extremely boring. Overall, Odyssey sucks. While I don't think this is technically the worst game in the series from a general gaming perspective, its lack of connection to the previous titles, boring narrative, and mediocre gameplay makes me rank it as the worst Assassin's Creed game in the series. Now we're moving on to number 10. My second least favorite Assassin's Creed game is Assassin's Creed Rogue, which is a game that I remember loving when it first came out, but after having played it numerous times since, And having thought about the game's narrative a bit more, it definitely is here in the bottom tier. So let's get started by talking about the open world, which is a worse version of Black Flags. Now, obviously, this takes place in like the New York area instead of the Caribbean, which I do find to be a pretty boring setting. I never loved New York as a setting in Assassin's Creed, though I do think it works better here than it does in AC3. From a gameplay perspective, it's more of the same, but with minor changes that don't really affect much. But it seems like they were just trying to differentiate themselves in any way from Black Flag. Things like the puckle gun, air rifle, grenade launcher, and gas mask are new, but they don't really add much to the overall experience. The mission structure here is fine. I will say that it is an improvement upon Black Flag's mission structure, which we'll really talk about later. But there are still some tailing missions that are pretty annoying, and also some really tedious, like clear out this area sort of missions. Side content here is fine as well. It's the same as Black Flag, but with a couple new things like assassin interceptions and prosperity, but there's also less things like there's no Templar hunts here. Now, from a narrative perspective, Rogue is so meh. It feels like such a generic AC story, but then they switch out the standard sides. In this game, the assassins are bad, the Templars are good, with no real moral grayness that I really love from this series, which is something that I feel like was really needed in this game. The concept of the story is cool as it serves as a sequel to 4 while also being a prequel to 3 by showing the purge of the Colonial Brotherhood that was mentioned in 3, and while it is cool to see characters from both 3 and 4 appear again in this game, the game just feels like a blatant retcon. Shay as a character is not a terrible protagonist, but his writing is pretty mixed and his voice acting is just as mixed, leading to some very funny one-liners. Most of the other characters here are largely forgettable. Most of the side characters are pretty dull throughout with the exception of Gist, who's pretty much just a cartoon character. And then, as I said, the returning characters like Achilles, Adewale, and Hatham aren't as good as their original appearances. The modern day in Rogue is completely useless. Obviously, it reuses assets from Black Flag, and while I do think it's cool to see Otso Berg in a main story of a game finally, you do spend most of your time with Violet da Costa, who is pretty annoying for a majority of the game, and the entirety of the modern day just ends up being Otso Berg being a dick, and he wants to send footage of Shay to the assassins just to taunt them. Overall, Rogue has a lot of potential, with it being the final piece of the Kenway saga, but the blatant retcons and the mediocre story, along with the bland location, is the reason why I place it here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, which, as much as it pains me to say it, it's gotta be AC1 here. And I say this as someone who's played through Assassin's Creed 1 about 30 times, and while it's probably been the longest amount of time since I last played this game, I feel like I know this game inside and out, and I know it well enough to where I don't really need to play it again to really rank this one. So let's start with the open world, which was really good at the time, being one of the most atmospheric games that I've played up to that point, and with each city being pretty solid, with Jerusalem probably being my favorite, but the kingdom sucks. I get why it's a thing in this game, but it's annoying to travel through because it's essentially a giant maze and it's a pain to navigate around, especially if you're trying to 100% the game, which by the way sucks as well considering you have to find all the Templars and the flags around the world and you don't get any reward for doing so, making the side content in this game a big pain. From a gameplay perspective, Assassin's Creed hasn't aged well. The free running is pretty clunky, but to be fair, it's not much worse than it is in the Ezio trilogy. And now while some did find the combat to be annoying, I actually find this combat system to be one of the best in the series, with later fights requiring much more skill than in some later games through the use of light and heavy attacks. Where this game completely fails though is the mission structure. It's appallingly bad. You literally have to do the same thing 9 times over and over again throughout the game. Essentially, whenever you enter a district in the game, which again happens 9 times, you have to do 2 to 3 investigation missions, which at the end of the day, there's only around 4 types of them. So that gets really tedious. Then once you complete those, you go to your bureau leader, kill your target, and then return to the bureau. It gets really repetitive, though I will say that the assassinations themselves are the best part of this game, with you having the freedom to assassinate them in a plentitude of ways. Though it is a bit more limited than future games by having a smaller range of assassination moves that can be done, and the fact that you can't swim, but it is fun nonetheless. From a narrative standpoint, I really do love the main narrative of this game. Though it is a bit generic at points, I feel like the Altair storyline here is a great setup to the Assassin-Templar conflict, and sets up the moral grayness of the groups, And this also moves on to the modern day as well, which I do think is a fantastic setup to the overarching narrative of the series, where conversations with Lucy and Vidic set up a great mysterious tone that's continued until the end of the Desmond saga. Altair as the main protagonist is fine. He has a nice character arc that's fulfilled throughout the course of this story, which is more than I can say for most other protagonists. But his voice acting's pretty dull in this game, leading to him being looked at as a pretty boring character when he really isn't. Outside of Altair, you have Al-Mualim and Robert de Saab, who I think are pretty good villains, and then you have Malik, who's a pretty good side character as well, but outside of that, the rest of the cast is pretty forgettable. Overall, AC1 is a game that I have a lot of nostalgia for, but taking that nostalgia away, it simply hasn't aged well. While it's a game that I loved at the time, and while it does still have a relatively strong narrative, the gameplay itself is tedious, which leads to me placing it here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, which for me is Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which, while it is relatively low on this list, it actually was even lower until my last couple playthroughs of it, where I did enjoy the base gameplay more every time I play it, making me move this a bit up. But starting from the open world, I think Victorian London is a fantastic setting and concept. The city of London itself is grand and probably one of my favorite cities in the franchise, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't a good Assassin's Creed city. The city of London is so grand that the parkour becomes an afterthought here. And instead of free running like you normally do, you end up using your rope launcher most of the time, which is completely ridiculous within the Assassin's Creed universe. And speaking of ridiculous, this entire game is ridiculous, making the game feel like a parody of Assassin's Creed instead of an actual main series Assassin's Creed game. The combat here is really dumb, with it just being a whole bunch of button mashing until a QuickTime event shows up. You push the QuickTime event and you're able to counter. And the aesthetics of this combat system is even dumber, as it just looks so ridiculous as you're just hitting people so quickly. The mission structure here isn't terrible. There are a few missions that can get annoying, especially the kidnapping missions. But outside of that, I do feel like the structure here is fine. I don't mind how they handled the switching between characters here, though I would have preferred that we got to play as Evie for more missions instead of Jacob getting about 2/3 of the missions here. The black box assassination missions here are some of the best in the entire series, with multiple ways to conduct your assassinations, though I do feel like one other game does it a bit better. The side content isn't great here in my opinion. Conquering all the bureaus is really tedious, as you have to do the same type of missions over and over and over again. There's the World War I time anomaly, which is cool, and a cool thing that they added to the game, because that's something they really didn't need to do. And since we'll never get a full World War I game, I do think this was a cool addition to this game. It allows us to learn more about the future of the Fry twins, while also learning more about the Isu as well. However, the rest of the side content is pretty monotonous and overall pretty forgettable. From a narrative standpoint, the story here is pretty mediocre. As I said, I feel like it's a parody of Assassin's Creed, with characters cracking jokes constantly, and those who don't make jokes just being characters of characters from previous games. And this includes Jacob and Evie as well, who I can never take seriously just due to their strange dialogue. And then we have the villain in Crawford Steric, who comes off as a really cartoony villain. Now I say all this, but something I will give this game credit for is that the entirety of the game is pretty well acted. All the actors do their job very well here, especially Jacob and Evie. That being said, I do love the narrative structure here for most sequences, where most of them comprise of Jacob hunting down one of his targets while Evie hunts for the Shroud of Eden. And also through this, Evie also fixes the mistakes that Jacob makes in the previous sequence. Now while I do like this, at the same time, the narrative is still completely ridiculous. Again, Jacob and Evie are somehow able to take over London, the biggest city in the world at that time, within the course of a year. And really at this point too, this narrative here has nothing to do with the grand scheme of the franchise either, making this feel kind of pointless. The modern day here would have been decent if it was playable. Instead we get a series of cutscenes that through these cutscenes, we get more modern day than we did for the last few games, with the inclusion of Sean, Rebecca, Otto Berg, Da Costa, and Galena. It also sets up the endgame of the Juno storyline, but obviously it was all for naught since they moved that storyline to the comics. Overall, Syndicate is just kind of pointless, really. It's really a pointless game, but that doesn't mean it's not a fun game. I did have some fun with the assassination missions, and it does have a solid narrative structure, though the narrative itself is filled with poor content. There's also some ridiculous gameplay throughout, forcing me to leave it here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, which for me is Assassin's Creed 3. And for me, this game is at the top of this bottom tier. And the reason for that is I think it has some of the highest highs in the entire franchise, but also has some of the lowest lows. The open world in this game is very dull, with a very gray color palette, though, to be fair, the remastered version of this game does partially fix this, but I still don't love Boston and New York from a level design standpoint, as they don't really favor free running, leading to you running along the streets for most of your playthrough. The free running system itself is more refined than previous titles, but as I said, there's less opportunities to use them. The combat here is fine. I do feel like I like it more than most people, but it's pretty basic and easy at most points. The naval combat here sucks. It's so clunky, it really is, and it's really tough to control the ship, but thankfully they improved it for future games. Now time to talk about the mission structure, which also sucks. There's so many dumb missions throughout this entire game, and a lot of them are just there just to integrate Connor into historic moments, with Connor leading battles for no reason, like the one where Connor goes back and forth on horseback, telling soldiers to attack. And then also we got like the Pole Revere mission, which is probably one of the worst missions in the entire franchise. Now the side content in the game is, at most points, probably the best part of the game. Now I do really love the Homestead missions. The Homestead missions really show a more lighthearted side of Connor's personality, which we don't get to see from the main story. The peg-leg missions are really fun, tomb-like missions. Naval missions, while not my favorite, do lead up to assassination that, for some reason, wasn't in the main story, though I think it should have been. However, outside of those, the other side activities are pretty monotonous. You got stuff like the Underground, the Almanac pages that are really annoying to do. From a narrative standpoint, AC3 is tough for me because it is filled with great ideas like Connor's backstory and character, and playing as Hatham at the beginning of the game, and then having that plot twist, but very few things here were executed well, with Connor having some really terrible writing. And then the Hatham sections completely mess with the pacing of the overall game. That being said though, I do love Hatham. I think his relationship with Connor is probably one of the biggest highlights of this game. And as bad as the writing is at points, I do like Connor as a character. He does have a tragic backstory and goes through many struggles throughout the game, only for him to fail his ultimate goal at the very end. My biggest problem with him is the fact that through the main story, he doesn't really develop from these events. Now, there was an epilogue speech that really highlights his development and really rounds him out as a character, but for some reason it was cut. Though it is actually in the audio files, and you can find it on YouTube. Watch it, it's really good. Most of the side characters in this game are pretty forgettable and annoying, though there are characters like Hatham and Achilles that I really do like, and then I don't mind Charles Lee as a villain. Now for the modern day, most people look at this as the best modern day in the series. However, the way I look at it is I look at it as a lot of wasted potential, which is pretty common in Assassin's Creed. While it is great to see Desmond as an assassin and his return to Abstergo being a great way to round out his story, I do feel like that section was really rushed. And through that, they kind of ruined Daniel Cross as a character, with Desmond just beating him up pretty easily each time, despite Daniel Cross formerly being one of the best assassins. And while I do feel like Desmond dying at the very end was the correct decision, again, I feel like the execution was off, where they really rushed the ending there, making the moment feel less meaningful than it really should have. Overall, AC3 is a tough game for me to rank because I do think it does certain things really well, like the relationship between Connor and Hatham and most of the side content, but it does some things very poorly, like the wasted potential with the modern day, the writing, the mission structure, the level design, and all of that makes me rank it here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, which for me is Assassin's Creed Unity, which is at the bottom of the middle tier here. I do enjoy Unity more than the general public, but not as much as certain other people that think it's one of the best AC games ever. Obviously, it did have a terrible launch that painted this game in a more negative light than it deserves, especially at this current point with its patched version, which while not flawless, definitely runs a lot better. From an open world standpoint, this is probably the most immersive Assassin's Creed game to date, with the city of Paris feeling alive with its massive crowds. From a gameplay perspective, this is the first game where they had the free run up, free run down system, which is great when it works, especially when descending, but it does make climbing a bit clunkier than it used to be, And overall, it isn't a great system here, as it makes you feel like you're moving on a track instead of being able to freely maneuver around the area. The combat in this game is one of my favorites in the series, as I feel like it's a perfect mix of difficulty and skill, while still also being aesthetically pleasing. Now, the range combat in this game is something I never really cared for, and also the fact that your opponents really use range combat a lot, and kind of harpens my opinion of the overall combat system, as whenever you're trying to escape from anything, you're pretty much screwed once you run out of medicine. Assassination missions are probably the best in the entire series, being black box assassination missions that allow you to have complete freedom of how you want to assassinate your target. Unlike Syndicate, where with certain assassination missions, they really force you to do certain things before you're able to assassinate your target. The side content here is good. The pair stories have a solid range of mission types and are generally pretty fun, but everything else seems pretty excessive. There are a bunch of collectibles throughout this game, like there are many other AC games. From a narrative perspective, I like Unity much more than other people, and I feel like your enjoyment of the narrative really comes down to whether or not you like the relationship between Arno and Elise. And that's really because they're the main center point of this entire narrative, especially since Arno's actions throughout the entire game are essentially just him trying to win back Elise. The reason he joins the Assassins and he hunts down Germain are so that he can redeem himself to Elise, and while I did enjoy this narrative, I still don't think it's one of the best Assassin's Creed has to offer. I do really like Arno as a protagonist, as he has the personality of a younger Ezio, but I feel like his relationship with Elise brings a new dynamic to the series. But I do have a problem with his character development, as he doesn't really get any in the actual main story, and it feels like all of his development was pretty much just saved for the Dead King's DLC. The other characters in the game are fine. Again, I like Elise, I like Germain as a villain, and I like Balek and Mirabeau, but that's pretty much it. I feel like the rest of the cast is pretty weak and pretty forgettable at the end of the day, making this cast feel pretty top-heavy. Now for the modern day, which is non-existent. I mean, it's barely there. I mean, all it is cutscenes with Bishop. There are the time anomalies, which are pretty fun, though, but at the end of the day, this modern day goes nowhere, with the ending of the game literally telling you, hey, the game didn't matter. Overall, I do like Unity more than most people. I really like the assassination missions. I like the open world. I really like some of the characters. The game has some solid side content, but the game does have some major flaws. It has some pretty clunky free running. It has a lot of technical glitches. It has a mixed narrative. So that's why I place Unity here at the bottom of my middle tier. Now we're moving on to number 5, which for me is Assassin's Creed 2. Which, I know this is a bit controversial, as this is looked at as one of the best games in the series, but for me, actually, 2 and Unity are pretty close. And while I loved 2 at the time, if you take away the nostalgia from the game, it becomes a pretty mediocre game with a really good story. I think the Italian Renaissance was a perfect setting here, especially in contrast to AC1, where AC2 is a more jovial game, has a much more lively open world, unlike AC1, which is dark, cold, and pretty depressing. And I feel like AC2's open world really benefited from this Ezio collection, which made the colors much more vibrant. The gameplay here, though, hasn't aged as well as future AC games, where the parkour is pretty clunky, especially before you get the climb leap, and the combat itself is very, very slow, as you spend most of your time waiting for your enemies to attack you so you can counter them, as the guards block most of your standard attacks. The mission structure is a massive flaw I have with AC2, where I do actually really like the mission structure of the first half of the game, but once you get to Venice is where everything gets screwed up. Sequence 7 is one of the biggest slogs in any Assassin's Creed game, where it's filled with escorting missions and sections where you have to clear out an area of guards. And this sequence takes about an hour to an hour and a half, which makes it one of the longest sequences in the game, compared to most where they only take about half an hour to 45 minutes. Sequence 8 is fine, but then we get to Sequence 9, which has some really dumb Carnivale mini-games, including the one where you have to catch the flag, which is really dumb because really all you're doing is running to the edge of a rooftop and jumping off the rooftop, landing on top of the flag, and then racing back. Now, this back half also has a couple tailing missions. It's not as bad as future games in terms of the number of them. However, the quality of them is very bad. While there is one where you're following Templars and you actually get to hear their plans and everything, that one's not too bad. But there's one where you're literally just following around the guy that has the apple for a good 15-20 minutes. And it's just so boring. Now let's talk about the side content in the game, which outside of the Subject 16 glyphs and tombs, I don't feel like it's that good. We got short quests like races, beat 'em up events, and assassination contracts, which are pretty boring, But as I said, like, the tombs are really good. They're really fun. Though they can get annoying if you start failing at them. It's one of these things where it's like, as long as you don't mess it up, it's really fun. But if you mess it up, it starts to get really tedious. The narrative of AC2 is one of the best in the entire series by having a perfect mix of showing the development of their character in Ezio, also having memorable villains like Rodrigo Borgia, and also having a lot of mysteries surrounding the Prophet and the first civilization. I remember seeing the ending of 2 for the first time and my mind was completely blown. To see Minerva give a message to Desmond through Ezio was such a great moment for me. Obviously, Ezio is a great protagonist, but I do think Ezio's first outing here isn't as solid as certain other protagonists in the series. However, as a whole, mixing in the next 2 games, that definitely makes Ezio probably the best character in the series. From a modern day standpoint, I think this game does a really good job at progressing the mysterious tone that came from Assassin's Creed 1, while expanding it through the lore that was given through the Subject 16 glyphs, and also the introduction of the Isu, also having the modern day connect to the Ancestor storyline by having Desmond being trained by the bleeding effect. Overall, I do think people look at this game with rose-colored glasses, and after taking out the nostalgia from the game, this game is pretty overrated compared to most other games in the series, even from someone who had played it back in the day. But the narrative and the modern days is still pretty strong within this game, and that's why I have this ranked at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, the top game in my middle tier, and that is Assassin's Creed Revelations, which is a game that's really grown on me over time, as I didn't really care for it when it first came out, but since then I really respect the narrative and the philosophy displayed throughout the entire game, and how this was a game that actually put the narrative before the actual setting, which is something that Assassin's Creed doesn't do anymore. Most people find Constantinople as a pretty boring setting, but I actually really enjoy this city. Though they did have to add some non-existent buildings and have other exaggerated buildings just to create some high points in Constantinople due to there not being many in real life. The gameplay here is more of the same from Brotherhood, but with minor changes. I really like the hook blade. It makes the free running a lot quicker without being ridiculous like the rope launcher from Syndicate. The combat is the same, but for some reason they decided to add slow-mo when you counter attacks, and to be honest, it's really distracting. I actually really don't like it. I never liked the focus on bombs that they put in this game, as I rarely use them in the game, and the crafting system just kind of went over my head. I hated the tower defense sections in this game, though they don't happen too often, and to be honest, the more you play them, the more they actually do get more complex. The biggest annoyance with the gameplay here for me is the Templar awareness system, where it's pretty annoying because once you become aware, the Templars can attack one of your dens, making you have to complete them once again or go through a tower defense section. The mission structure here is fine. Most sequences comprise of 2 storylines, the main storyline that involves the Assassin Templar conflict, and then the other storyline that involves Sophia. Now, when it comes to the actual missions themselves, though, there aren't many annoying ones, but there are some. The side content here is meh. I mean, it's better than AC2, but it's definitely worse than Brotherhood. As I mentioned, the renovation system from Brotherhood returns, along with Templar dens that replace the Borgia towers, though they operate pretty similarly. The Assassin recruit system also returns here, and has some modifications with a couple of actual recruit missions, and also Master Assassin missions that are nice inclusions to the game. The faction, Puriris, and book quests are also there, but they're pretty monotonous. Now, from a narrative perspective, this game is pretty masterful. Darby McDevitt, I feel like, is a real master of philosophical storytelling and is able to create a perfect conclusion to Ezio and Altair's stories, with the ending of Revelations being one of my favorite moments in all of media. Now, Revelations Ezio is probably my favorite incarnation of him, as through Darby's writing, Ezio is able to articulate his philosophical beliefs throughout the entire narrative. The other characters here are fine as well. Obviously, you got Yusuf, who is a fantastic, fun character, and I personally like Ahmet as a villain, as I feel like he's a direct counter to the Revelations version of Ezio. But everyone else, like Sophia and Suleiman, they're fine. From a modern day standpoint, this game gets criticized for not moving the plot forward, and really, if you think about it, Revelations in general is just filler. It is. I mean, nothing in this game was completely necessary to the overall AC narrative, and was only made to satisfy fans until AC3 came out. And the interesting thing here is that AC3 was already in development for 1 year at the time this game started development. So that's why that the modern day involves Desmond being in a coma before their arrival at the Grand Temple, because they couldn't really do anything there considering the story outlined for AC3 was probably already decided. But I feel like Darby did his best he could to make this story relevant, with having Desmond interact with Subject 16 and having the Desmond's Journey missions that really rounded out Desmond's character. Overall, Revelations is a game that I've really grown to love over time with its fantastic narrative, but I couldn't just fit it into my top tier. Most of the reasons for that is because of its gameplay being a bit uninspired, and a lot of the changes that were made here aren't changes for the better, so that's why I have this at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, which is the bottom of my top tier, which is Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, which at one point was my favorite game of all time. But since it's moved down in my rankings, I think I've played this game about 3 times since then, and to be honest, while this game does have a fantastic overall narrative, it does suffer from a lot of pacing issues and some terrible mission design that caused it to move down on my rankings. Where this game shines is its open world, which is a massive map of the Caribbean Sea. Mind you, not really accurate, but it's fine. And most of the locations here are accessible without loading times, which was incredible at the time, even though more recent AC games do this as well. This is one of the most fun games to free roam around, as there's so many different types of locations. The cities are fine. I really like Havana, but we got Nassau and Kingston, which just aren't my favorite. That being said, a lot of the map is just empty ocean, which leads to a lot of naval gameplay, which thankfully they made the naval combat much more accessible than it was in AC3, where in AC3 it was pretty clunky, it was pretty slow. Here the ship feels a lot more lighter and it isn't as stilted when you're trying to aim your shots. The melee combat system is more of the same from AC3 with minor improvements, but nothing really worth mentioning. The hunting and crafting systems here are much better than they were in AC3, but I still never felt incentivized to actually go and hunt, considering you could just buy hunting goods from the stores for pretty cheap, allowing you to craft pretty easily. I really hate the diving bell sections in the game. While there aren't many in the main game, when you're going for 100% completion, you have to do so many of them. They're so annoying to go around, loot chests when there's a whole bunch of sharks around you. It's really annoying. And also managing your breath. It's really annoying. But now for the mission structure. It's so bad. It's really the biggest flaw of the game and really lessens my opinion of the game every single time I play it. The game is filled to the brim with tailing missions, with there even being naval tailing missions as well. The thing is that this game starts off well for the first couple sequences. Sequence 3 isn't great, but for the most part it's tutorials, so obviously you had to have them there. Sequence 4 though is pretty solid outside of the mission where you have to get into Tulum undetected. But then that's where it goes to shit. Sequences 5 through 8 are annoying, with so many tailing missions and like clear this area of guards to loot this chest and those sort of things. They really get tedious, and most of it feels like there's no real narrative reason to it. The entirety of Sequence 7 involves you escaping Nassau, which just felt entirely pointless as it comprises of 2 tailing missions, one mission that makes you clear out I think 4 areas of guards to loot a certain chest, and then a tedious naval mission at the very end. All to just include this historic event into the game, but I felt like it was really pointless. The last 4 sequences of the game though are pretty good, though there are some annoying missions in Sequence 10. Sequences 11 and 12 are 2 of my favorite sequences in the entire series. Overall, the middle of the game is so monotonous though that it does ruin my experience, especially when trying to rush through the game. The side content here is okay. The Templar hunts are pretty short but fun missions that introduce some interesting characters like Rona and Anto. The legendary ship missions are really tough and really only doable if your ship is fully upgraded. Now everything else though is pretty standard. It's like looting chests, getting animus fragments, that sort of thing. Now for the narrative, which might be the strongest narrative in the entire series. It's not perfect. As I said before, the pacing in the middle really drags. Now, there are great moments that come from these sections, like Blackbeard's death and being marooned with Vayne, but I feel like these sections could have been done in a better way. Outside of that, this game probably has the best cast of characters in the entire series, with most of the pirates that Edward meets being great characters in their own rights. I mean, we got Hornigold, Mary Read, Thatch, Vayne, Rackham, Bonnet, Anne Bonny, Bart Roberts. I mean, I really love a lot of these characters. And then even moving on to the Templars, we got Torres, Rogers, and Ducasse, who I think are pretty fun characters in their own right as well. And outside of them, we also have Adewale, who I think is pretty great in this game, though I don't love his future appearances. And then obviously we have Edward, who probably has the greatest character arc in the history of gaming, in my opinion. That leads to some of my favorite moments in the entire franchise, especially towards the end of the game, that display his character development with scenes like the memory corridor sequences in sequence 12, and also the conversation of Atabai in sequence 11. Now for the modern day, it's fine. I love the extra bit of lore that you get from hacking into these computers, and I love how the twist was that John Standish was a sage, but the rest of it was pretty boring. There's a lot of crappy characters like Melanie and Olivier, and this modern day has less importance to the overall series than the ones that came before it, though it's still better than certain games like Unity and Origins. Overall, AC4 is a fantastic game with fun gameplay and great characters, but the mission structure is so bad, and with the requirement to constantly upgrade your ship, it makes this game feel like a pain to replay at points, so that's why it places at the bottom of my top tier. And now we're moving on to number 2. My second favorite Assassin's Creed game in the series is Assassin's Creed Origins, which very easily could have been number 1. When I mentioned that there was one spot in particular that could have changed, it was definitely Assassin's Creed Origins here. And I really debated putting this at number 1, especially after a recent replay where I really enjoyed playing this. But I do have some reservations about putting it at number 1, so that's why it's here at number 2. Open world wise, I think this is probably the best open world in the entire series, with definitely the best looking open world aesthetically. I think Ancient Egypt was such a great setting, and they were able to really recreate this area in a fantastic way that also made it work from a gameplay perspective. The gameplay here is a big deviation from older games, but I do think it's just a gradual progression of the AC formula without stripping it of its identity like Odyssey eventually does. The combat here is probably the best in the entire series, utilizing RPG elements and light and heavy attacks to create a really fun combat system that requires skill, though it doesn't flow as well as something like Assassin's Creed Unity's. I think it also has one of the best mission structures in the entire franchise, with the fewest amount of annoying missions throughout, though it's not perfect, especially with the Aya missions, which they force you to utilize weaker weapons than the ones that you would use as Bayek, and because of that, it really makes these sections drag. And also the naval combat in this game isn't as fluid as something like Black Flag, leading to some annoyance there as well. The side content here feels a bit uninspired, where most of the side quests here are pretty forgettable, consisting of you rescuing people from forts or killing a group of guards, and the abundance of locations makes this a really annoying game to 100% complete. Now for the narrative, I think this is a big mixed bag, where it has some of my favorite moments in all of Assassin's Creed. The Rujik scene, the Medunamun scene, really just all of the memory corridor scenes, and the scenes towards the end that lead to the formation of the Brotherhood. All these are really great scenes, some of my all-time favorites, but I also feel like there's a lot of wasted potential here. The pacing is a bit off at points. There are some plot points that are a little bit confusing at first. And then there's also just the wasted potential of the origin story of the assassins, which just feels like a blatant retcon. But from a character perspective, I love Bayek. If we had gotten another game with him, he would easily be my favorite protagonist in the series, and probably one of my favorite protagonists in the history of gaming. Now, like Edward, he does get a full character arc, though it's not as blatant as Edward's, with that scene where he rescues the child at the end of the game really being such a fantastic moment as well, really encapsulating his character. I also just love how he was acted by Abubakar Salim. He was just acted with so much passion, as he gave one of my favorite performances in the history of gaming, showing so much emotion during the Rujik scene, the Medunamun scene. It's really great. It's really miles ahead of any other performance we've seen in the Assassin's Creed series. But at the same time, he also has a lighter side to him, where he doesn't bow down to Cleopatra. He has jokes that he makes with Apollodorus. He really is just such a fun character. The side characters here are a bit more mixed. I think Aya is well acted, also written pretty inconsistently, making her a less likable character than the game tries to make her be. The villains like Cleopatra and Caesar are just okay, but some of the Order of the Ancient members are pretty good, like Tahaka, Medunamun, while there are other ones that are pretty underdeveloped, like Berenice, Hatepi, and Flavius, who I do love Flavius just because of how terrible he is, but he's still obviously not a great character. And it's kind of a similar thing with characters like Hepzibah and Apollodorus, who aren't given much to do, but what they do is pretty fun. I do think they have some funny moments, even though they aren't the greatest characters. The modern day here sucks. While it is finally another playable modern day with Layla being introduced, she's a terrible character. There were some really dumb moments here, like the moment where she's literally about to get murdered by Abstergo, who just found her hideout, and for some reason, after killing the people that were going to kill her, she decides, you know what, let's go back into the Animus. It's like, yeah, that's definitely the smart thing to do there. Overall, Origins does have its flaws, but I really just love the game. I think from just a pure gameplay standpoint, it's probably the most fun I have with Assassin's Creed. And I think it's such a perfect progression of the Assassin's Creed formula, while staying true to the series' identity, and also while having a great character like Bayek. And again, while I did consider putting this at number 1, it does have flaws which make me put it here at number 2. And now it's time for my favorite game in the series. My number 1 game in the Assassin's Creed series is AC Brotherhood, which again, I really struggled with putting this at number 1. But to me, I feel like this is the most pure representation of what Assassin's Creed used to be. But at the end of the day, it's still not perfect. Like I said of AC2, the setting of the Italian Renaissance is pretty cool. But I don't love Rome as a city. The main city itself is good. However, the surrounding areas are pretty annoying as it's filled with cliffs that you can't climb, making you have to run around. From a gameplay perspective, this game improves upon the gameplay of AC2 in pretty much every single way. The combat is more offensive with the addition of execution streaks, allowing you to kill multiple guards pretty easily after your first kill, and also having easy access to your hidden pistol. The addition of the crossbow is also really helpful here with stealth. The renovation system here expanded to the entirety of Rome instead of just Monteriggioni, which was a fun inclusion to this game. The assassin recruit system was introduced here as well. And while I do think it was improved upon in Revelations, it is better utilized within the main story here, as it is an integral part in certain main missions. Now, from a mission structure standpoint, this game is good but not perfect. Sequence 4 is brutal in this game, as most of the missions are tutorials, but there's for some reason multiple tutorials on the recruit system, with one of those missions being a tailing mission. That is probably the most boring tailing mission in the history of Assassin's Creed. And the thing is, like, Brotherhood has a lot of tailing missions. It has one with the banker that's also pretty annoying, and then the most annoying one being the one with Micheletto, which is definitely the most tedious one in the entire franchise. But when it comes down to side content, this is easily the best game in this series. There are the standard courier and assassination contract missions, and there's also thief and courtesan missions that aren't much better than those. But there's so much more than just that. There's the Christina memories, which are fantastic as they allow you to see more insight into Ezio's love life, though the missions themselves can be kind of annoying. We got Templar agent missions, which are pretty much glorified assassination contracts, but I feel like they add an extra bit of narrative to them that make them a bit less monotonous. The War Machine missions are really impressive, yet kind of annoying because there are sections where you can't be detected. But it is impressive that they took their time to create these set pieces and these different vehicles for you to pilot. The Lair of Romulus missions are a great progression of the tombs from AC2, creating more diverse gameplay within them. And then we got the Truth, which are the Subject 16 glyphs in this game, which leads to a really interesting mysterious message from Subject 16, which was an interesting piece of foreshadowing back then, though it never amounted to anything. And I feel like it's also something that they could have done something really interesting with, especially after the events of AC3, but they never went around and did it. Now, from a narrative standpoint, I think it's good. It's not as good as AC2 or 4, but it does what it needs to do to progress Ezio's character through subtle character development, and gives us a fun villain in Cesare. Though, I will say that, and this goes for 2 as well, I don't love how the villains come off in this game, as they're very cartoonish, they're very evil for evil's sake, where AC1 prided itself on making the conflict between the Assassin and Templars being a very gray sort of thing, but here it becomes very clear Assassins are good guys, Templars are bad guys, with the Templars being shown just to be maniacal villains. What this game does do perfectly, though, is the modern day. Brotherhood's modern day is what should have been done throughout the entire series, but for some reason they never replicated it since. I mean, Odyssey does try to replicate this formula, but the problem there is the writing. The writing just is so poor that it comes off as a joke. But here, I do like that the modern day is mostly optional, as there are many conversations between the characters that you'll only see if you exit the Animus after certain sequences. And this makes these characters so much more likable and relatable as you see them banter and have fun, which is something you don't really see them do throughout the main story. The mysterious tone of the modern day from ACs 1 and 2 continues on here, and is something I sorely miss. The entire section at the end of the game with Juno is one of my all-time favorite moments in the series, which again leads to some cryptic words that mostly lead to nothing. But obviously there we also got the death of Lucy, which completely blew my mind at the time. Overall, AC Brotherhood is my favorite game in the entire series, and a lot of that comes down to the modern day and also the quality of the side content. The main narrative itself does have some fantastic moments within it as well. And this game also encapsulates everything that I think about when I think of Assassin's Creed, so that's why it's here at number 1. So there we go, that is my entire ranking of the entire Assassin's Creed main series. And that was a lot. That was a lot of games to talk about. This is going to be a long video. But yeah, this is a video I've been wanting to make for a very long time. So I'm very happy I was able to finally make it. Now that out of the way, I will probably go and move on to do more AC rankings in the future with things like maybe the protagonists, the DLCs, the modern days, possibly the side games. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities. And there's so much about Assassin's Creed that I would like to talk about in the future. But yeah, that is everything I have to say for this video. That's every single Assassin's Creed game. Thank you for watching.